I'm started recording here, and now I'll share my screen again.
Thank you.
No problem. Very well, folks. Excellent. So if you have any questions or any comments on it or anything, feel free to send a message to the chat. Alicia is going to be helping out, keeping track of those. So really, today the goal here is to give an update on how is the wheat crop looking like around Kansas, and also what do we have going on as K-State research on wheat agronomy, right? So going there to this first part of the presentation there, where we're going to have three parts: wheat crop conditions, the overview of my research program, and an on-farm survey project that we had. Going to the first part here on the crop conditions. Whenever we talk about the crop conditions, we need to look back in the fall and how conditions were back then. If we look at the window when farmers are typically sowing, right, what we're looking at here is the amount of rainfall that we received across Kansas between September 16th and December 15th. So considering those very early farmers that are sowing for dual purpose there in mid-September, all the way through those guys were sowing after a soybean crop or after a corn crop late in the beginning of December there. That's the summary of rainfall that we have had. And as you see there, parts of Southwest Kansas got very, very limited rainfall. The far extreme Southwest part of the state. Central Kansas got there anywhere from 3 to 4 inches. There seems to be a circle there in the center of the state that maybe got a little bit less, 1 to 2 inches in that period. And of course, as much as 15 inches in the eastern part of the state. So how does this compare historically, right, to where we should have been? So where we're looking at here is in inches, the departure from normal for that 3-month period from September 16th through December 15th of last year. And what you see here is that for the majority, we were actually well behind normal, right? For part of central Kansas and southwest Kansas, as much as 3 to up to 6 inches behind normal. So although for them we attained some decent stands throughout the state, there were parts of the state in which the stand establishment was really not optimal, right? This is an example here of our own research experiments near Great Bend there, just west of town on mid-December. And because we planted relatively late after soybeans, and we didn't get any rainfall really through the end of the year pretty much, by mid-December, we didn't have much of a crop there established, right? But that period right after that mid-December through mid-January, there was a considerable amount of rainfall that fell throughout the state, as you can see here in this chart. So anywhere from about half an inch all the way to about 5 or 6 inches there. With these January or December-January rainfall, we actually had a lot of late emergent crop, right? Especially in the southwest portion of the state and in central Kansas as well in some fields, right? So we have pretty much two situations here. Either crops that emerged and back in the fall, and overall south central Kansas, north central Kansas, northwest Kansas were in decent shape, and a big portion of southwest Kansas and parts of central Kansas that really emerged in the spring, right? Because of the just after this precipitation here actually emerged in the winter. Sorry, not in the spring, but in the winter. Now the question is, for that late emergent crop, what's the potential, right? How much can I expect compared to a normal year? Are we going to lose any yield in that late emergent crop? And this is a summary of 5 years of research that was done in Garden City. And as that blue line, well, actually what we're looking at here is a research experiment that was planted on the first of each month, right? So the first date there will be October 1st, and then November 1st, December 1st, and so on. Each one of those points is a month delay in planting date. And on the left side, we have grain yield, which is that blue line and the blue circles. And on the right side, we have test weight, or the yellow line and yellow circles there. What we see there is that we have a very consistent decrease in grain yield for each month that we are delaying, right? So even though, let's say that we planted on October 1st or November 1st, but the crop didn't emerge until mid-January, you can see here that the yield potential of that crop would have gone from about 50 bushels per acre to close to 25 bushels per acre, 20 to 30 bushels per acre there. And again, this is an average of 5 years of research here. So this also depends on the weather conditions during the spring. If it turns out to be quite a bit of moisture from here on and cool temperatures, I don't see why a spring emergent crop would yield this 20 bushels per acre. There's still potential to yield more than that, but it's really going to depend on the weather conditions. So that was kind of an overview of what we saw in the fall and in the winter. Another thing that is important to keep in mind is that we had a relatively warm month of February there. So that allowed for some tiller to occur, even in those late emergent fields and in the fields that were planted late, regardless of their emergence date. So many times this year, seemed like coming out of the winter, we had the crop in relatively better shape, those late planted crops, than some of the past years when we had a very cold winter. So just overall, that warm winter, a little bit warmer winter that we had, allowed the crop to kind of continue tillering through the winter there. Now, perhaps a more recent concern that growers might have is related to this recent freeze that we had, right? So on April 3rd, last Friday, temperatures fell to very low levels around the state. What you're looking at here, those numbers on the screen, they are the minimum temperatures that were recorded in K-State Maisonette weather stations. And you see here that they range from as low as 16 Fahrenheit in northwest Kansas to up to 36 Fahrenheit in the southeast corner of the state. So a very large range in the minimum temperatures that we observed in that freeze that we had last Friday. Now, when we're trying to estimate, okay, what's the potential for freeze damage in the crop, right? A few things that we need to keep in mind are how cold did it get? For how long were those cold temperatures sustained? And what was the growth stage of the crop, right? Those three things are the most important things. So if we look at how long temperatures occurred below 24 Fahrenheit, and 24 Fahrenheit is the threshold for a crop that is jointing, right? If temperatures were held for too long below 24 for a jointed crop, we could see some freeze damage. And as you see here in the south central part of the state, southeast and eastern Kansas, essentially you almost didn't have temperatures reaching those thresholds. But as you go to central Kansas and through northwest Kansas, we had anywhere from 8 hours all the way to about 21 hours of temperatures at a freezing, at levels that could cause freeze injury. So the concern with that would be with fields that were more advanced, right? Fields that were adjoining in this portion of the state, central Kansas, north central Kansas, or northwest Kansas. Okay, so how the third factor here, how far along was the crop? And here we look at an estimate that we have developed over the last 5 years together with Dr. Eric DeWolf here on the main campus. It's a very simple growth model for wheat that tells us, depending on how many degrees we accumulated above 32 in the year, what's the approximate growth stage of the crop. And as you see here, that the southeast part of the state and south central Kansas mostly were adjoining or second node, right? The most advanced fields. That central portion, which is a lighter blue, we're more now looking at strong, whenever the leaves are upright and getting to jointing. And the white portion on northwest, we're really about tillering or so for the majority, right? So where the crop was further along, we didn't have temperatures that could really sustain much damage. But the concern would be really that central portion of the state in fields that were more advanced, right? So overall, a low risk. Overall, seems like we could have dodged this bullet, but the more advanced fields is where I would be concerned, right? They could have been those fields that were planted earlier, or to a variety that is just earlier in getting out of winter dormancy, uh, perhaps on some thinner stands or heavy residue, drier soils, or those low spots on the field, right? So we could see some freeze damage on those more advanced fields. So just as a reminder here, what we're looking for, if we are looking for in our fields to see if we sustain any freeze damage or not. First thing, we need to wait about a week, right? We're not going to see much signs of the freeze damage before those 7 to 10 days. But then we can look for the color of the new leaves. If the new leaves that are emerging are nice and green, that's excellent. If they are yellow, they're probably could be an indication that that tiller is probably gone. Most important, also looking at the developing head, and I have a couple of pictures there comparing a healthy head, which is nice and turgid and green, crispy, light green, versus a head that was damaged by cold, and you can see that it's kind of whitish, brownish, light brown type of color, and it's very flaccid, right? It doesn't have that crispiness to it. So that's what we're looking for here in a few days. We could take a look at that potential for freeze damage in the developing head. If the freeze was strong enough, we could also look for lesions on the stems, right? In that case, we could see some new tiller growth as well. So folks, that's an update on what we're seeing in the state as far as the wheat goes. So again, overall, those fields that emerged last fall, even the ones that emerged late, they were able to tiller through the winter, overall in good shape. The concern will be with some of those late planted fields or late emerged fields for dry conditions. And of course, a more recent concern now with the freeze event in the most advanced fields in central Kansas. Switching gears here a little bit and talking about research and what are we as K-State developing as applied information for growers in our attempt to improve our management recommendations, right? So I'm going to give a little bit of a program overview, and I will touch base on a couple of different projects here just as example. So another overview of the program, right? What you're seeing here, I mean, this year we have trials that are looking at wheat agronomy in 10 different locations across Kansas. We have a total of 21 different projects that are out and planted. These projects are in several locations each, so we have a total of close to 8,000 research plots. And what you see there in that figure is an example for one of the fields that we have this year. Each color is a different experiment, right? And this is a field that we have in Hutchinson, for example, where we would have about 6 experiments being conducted in that single location, right? And those experiments are replicated in several locations. And most of these trials, they're looking at that interaction of variety and management. So we want to understand how can we better manage our different varieties. And since 2016, we have had over 50 projects in those 4 seasons preceding this one, and another 21 projects this season. So we're reaching really close to 70 or 80 projects that were trying to improve our management recommendations there. The locations where we have the trials established this year, you can see there in that map, right? They are mostly in the central corridor of the state, but we also have a couple locations in western Kansas there. So really trying to represent the different conditions that we have around Kansas. Great Bend specifically, right? We are working with the Great Bend Co-op in the west part of town, just on West Barton County Road, a few miles there, just a mile west of the airport. And you can see there that we are switching fields every year. This is the 3rd year that we have had our research in that field or in that farm, or we're always switching fields. Which one of those colors is actually a different year where we had research there at that field by Great Bend. This year in specific, what we're looking at in Great Bend, we have 4 different projects. One of them is a project where we're trying to understand whether different varieties differ in their response to nitrogen rate. So we have 14 different varieties and 4 different nitrogen rates, and that's that big blue trial that you see there. We're also having a trial where we're looking at the interaction of seeding rate by seed treatment by seed cleaning. We're also trying to better understand our variety-specific response to seeding rate and to fungicide this year in Great Bend. But I'm not going to focus only on this. Overall, you know, a few projects that I wanted to highlight, and of course, I'm not going to go into all of them. But one that is very important is a project, the first one that you see there is a nitrogen by sulfur by variety interaction, right? So how do we manage our nitrogen? Do we need to change our sulfur management, and does that depend on variety? I'm going to touch base on that project a little bit more. Also going to touch base on a project that we're trying to mine long-term data from variety trials. And then we also have several other trials, as you see there, late season nitrogen, late season sulfur, variety by fungicide interactions, nitrogen by variety interactions, dual purpose seeding rate studies, and seed cleaning, and several other projects along these lines. So I selected a few here just to go ahead and highlight some of the results that we have had to you guys so far. And the sulfur project that I mentioned being very important, the reason it is very important is simply we have less pollution going up. So we have less sulfur coming down in the atmosphere, in the rainfall from the atmosphere. And simply put, since about 2000, we are mining our soils, right? We have higher yields. We're removing a lot of sulfur from the soil. And so since about 2000, we have been mining. We are in a negative, we are in a deficit or a negative balance when we compare the amount that we're removing, and that's the yellow line, versus the amount that's being put in the rainfall back into the system, which is the purple line there. So with that, we're seeing more and more signs of sulfur deficiency throughout the state. So you can see here on this next picture that that lighter green that we see in the middle of the field, that's really typical of sulfur deficiency. It can be confounded with nitrogen deficiency. The way that we really differentiate those is that nitrogen is a mobile nutrient in the plant. So we're going to see the deficiency in the older leaves because the nitrogen is going to move from the older to the new growth, whereas sulfur is immobile in the plant, and so we're going to see that the deficiency more show up in the new growth in the upper canopy, because it's not going to move to that part of the canopy. So that's how we would differentiate. But this scenery here, it's becoming more and more common in Kansas because of this sulfur deficiency. So we went ahead and, working with the Kansas Wheat Commission, we established a 3-year project that we're looking at 3 nitrogen rates, 50, 100, 150% of the recommended for a 60 bushel per acre yield goal. Sulfur rate, 0, 10, 20, and 40 units of sulfur per acre. And we also selected varieties with different nitrogen use efficiency. So just to give you a highlight of what we're finding so far, and this is the result for our trial last year in Ashland Bottoms, which is very sulfur deficient. First, let's look at that black line in the bottom of the slide. So we're looking at nitrogen rate in the bottom versus the different colors of the lines. They are our sulfur rate, right? The black line being 0 units of sulfur per acre. First thing that we see here is that regardless of our nitrogen rate, we can go from our 50% all the way to 150%. We almost saw no response if we didn't put nitrogen out or sulfur out. Now, if we provided 10 units of sulfur, which is the red line, you can see that the first thing that we see is a bump in the yields in this deficient site from that 40 bushel per acre range to about 60. But then we also allow the crop to respond to our nitrogen rate. If we went from 50% to 100%, we raised our yields from about 65 all the way to about 80 bushels per acre there. But then it leveled out. We probably had sufficient sulfur for our 100% nitrogen rate. But if we went up in our nitrogen rate with a higher yield potential, that 10 units of sulfur, it was not enough anymore. Now we needed 20 or 40 units of sulfur that allowed us to have a better yield there. So you see this interaction here between nitrogen rate and sulfur rate, and this was independent of variety. Protein kind of had the opposite behavior. You see that the highest protein was actually the zero sulfur, and this is very simply put, it's a dilution process. We had such a low yield level in that treatment that we end up with the highest protein. By adding sulfur, we were able to, well, first by adding nitrogen, we were able to increase that protein rate, right? So proteins went up as we increased our nitrogen rate. And if we had the 20 or the 40 units of sulfur out with the highest nitrogen rate, we were able to attain the same protein level of that very low yielding treatment or the black line, right? So that interaction, the first effect that we saw on the sulfur was decreased protein just because of dilution, of much more yield, less protein. And then as we increased our nitrogen rate and sulfur rate, we were able to reach that same protein level. And here we have an effect of variety as well. You see here on these bars, we had LCS meat and SY monument with about the similar protein level. And in this trial, Zenda turned out to have a slightly higher protein than the other two varieties. So that's one example of what we're doing in the nitrogen and sulfur and variety interaction. One example for a very low organic matter, sandier soil, where we expect to see a very big response to sulfur. Switching gears here a little bit, we have a different trial that we're looking at an old question again, but trying to quantify the probability of break even. How often are we going to break even in our investment? And we're looking at this trial at the interaction of seeding rate, seed cleaning, and seed treatment. So essentially, we have three populations, 600,000, 900,000, 1.2 million seeds per acre, three cleaning intensities of that seed. So one that is not cleaned at all, one that goes through an air screen process, and one that goes through a gravity table and a color sorter with a Polanski seed, who is helping us with that with this project here, doing the seed cleaning for us. Two seed treatments, either no seed treatment or both Cruiser Max and Cruiser 5FS, so the fungicide and the insecticide piece of it. And again, it's a 3-year project. This one we're doing anywhere from 8 to 10 locations per year, again, to try to see how often is it going to break even. So very briefly, taking a look at this data from last year, we're using the variety monument that AgriPro has worked with Polanski to provide that for us. So what we found last year, what you see here, we had this trial. So we have the locations where we were conducting the trial, right? Ashland Bottoms, Bellevue, Colby, Hutchinson, Leoti, Manhattan, Mitchell County, and analysis across all locations. And on the left side, we have our factors that we're studying: seeding rate, seed cleaning, treatment, and all those interactions. So the message here is what's highlighted in yellow is what was significant. And so we see that seeding rate was significant in 5 out of 7 cases, seed cleaning was significant in 4 out of 7, and seed treatment in 1 out of 7. And going a little bit more in depth here, we see that seeding rates, and this is the analysis across all those 7 locations. As we increased seeding rate, we were actually, for every 300,000 seeds more that we were planting, we were increasing our grain yields in about 5 bushels per acre, right? And that was pretty linear, as you see there. When we're looking at cleaning the seed, right, we're more gaining about 2 bushels per acre for every step that we take in making sure that seed is of a good quality, right, from known to air screen, and from air screen to gravity table, increasing about a couple bushels per acre each step there. Now, keep in mind that this is not a comparison of bean run seed versus certified seed, okay? This is, if you have a seed that is a high quality enough to be certified, what's the value of going through that process of cleaning the seed, right? So this is not a comparison of bean run versus certified seed. This is just the effect of this clean on seed that could be certified anyways because it is high quality. And sometimes about the seed treatment, what we've seen is that it depended on seeding rate. So you see here this graph, in the blue charts, the blue bars, they are our treated seed, and the orange ones are the ones that were not treated. And you see that sometimes you have an advantage in grain yield, especially in the low population. So 600,000 and 900,000 seeds per acre, we had an advantage in yield by treating the seed, and we didn't have any significant difference at the high populations there. So really showing a potential for yield gains, especially on the low seeding rate side. Now, finally here, switch gears probably to the last project that I will discuss with you from our current program. This is a project that we're trying to go through and mine data from long-term variety trials that were conducted in the region. So really what we're looking at here, you have the 3 states that we're working with. So our neighbors to the west, Colorado, and to the south, Oklahoma. And each one of those points that you see, the white circles that you see in the map, they are places where we had variety trials in the last 20 years. The bigger the circle, the more observations we had. So overall, you see that we have about 100,000 yield observations. So this is a huge amount of data that we have to work with. And really, I mean, do we really need to reinvent the wheel, or can we look back into this historical data and learn from it? That's what we're doing here. So because this region is so diverse and in weather patterns, what we did here was to group locations by weather pattern. So you see that we have 4 different colors: green, orange, purple, and kind of brown. Those colors, they are rainfall gradients, right? From a drier weather in the west to a more moist weather in the east. And we also have different shades, right? We have a lighter shade in the north, and it goes to a darker shade in the south. And what we're looking at there, it really is temperature. So essentially, we got the yearly accumulation of rainfall and temperature, and we divided this big region into smaller subregions. So Great Bend here would have been included in that region 5, which kind of goes from that Great Bend region, perhaps a little bit east of there, through Garden City and Meade, approximately, right? So that's the region that we're working with. So our 2 questions were, how did management practices affect our yield in the last 20 years for the variety trials? And how have variety traits affected yield in the last 20 years? So just looking at this region 5, where Great Bend is located there, what we're looking at here is that trials that received a foliar fungicide, they were the highest yielding ones, and they average about 82 bushels per acre in the last 20 years. Trials that did not get foliar fungicide, then they yielded less, but that yield depended on the previous crop. So that if the trial was following corn or milo, and if it was planted too early, before the 7th of October, that resulted in the lowest yields of about 45 bushels per acre. If the trial in these regions were planted after wheat or fallow, they were resulting in about 65 bushels per acre. From a variety perspective there, what we're seeing is that it depended on our main management. If in irrigated trials, a few of traits that were of interest were stripe rust, coleoptile length, straw strength, and winter hardiness. Dryland trials in the west was drought tolerance, coleoptile length, first hollow stem, and stripe rust. If we move to central Kansas now and look at fungicide versus no fungicide, trials that got fungicide, the varieties that were successful in those trials were medium to late heading, had a good drought tolerance, good acid soil tolerance, and medium to short height. Varieties that were successful in trials that did not get fungicide, they had good stripe and leaf rust tolerance, good fall grazing potential, early heading date, and good drought tolerance as well. Interesting here, take a look and see that if we were applying fungicide, those varieties that were medium and late, they were more successful. If we were not applying fungicide, now an earlier variety with good stripe and leaf rust resistant became successful. So that tells me that probably we're not only escaping the heat with those early varieties, but we're also escaping some of the disease pressure if we're selecting some earlier varieties. Finally, what we did here was also try to figure out what's the best planting date in each one of those regions. And here just show you 2 regions as an example of what we did. The left one is that Northwest Kansas, Northeast Colorado. We see that the optimum planting date there is that line that we're seeing, kind of like a curve on top of all the points. And the other region is that South Central Kansas had a much wider planting window, still attaining good yield levels. Now, if we would put all of these in one photo, right, if we would choose one day of the year when I could plant all my wheat crop, what was that day? And that's what I'm showing this map here. So I know that planting everything in one day is not realistic, but this date tells us what we need to shoot for to be around that date. And as you can see here, it really went from the 25th of September as the optimum planting date in Northwest Kansas, Northeast Colorado.
I can't hear it, and this is the loudest it gets on this computer.
Oh, you did find it?
Mm-hmm.
And as we trying to just mute person who came in now. And as we go south, sorry about that, as we go south, that planting date gets later, right? As there in the Great Bend region, about the October 10th was our optimum planting date. And as we move south and east, that became later and later, all the way to about October 20th in southern Oklahoma. So, folks, this is just a brief overview of 3 different projects and all the projects that we had going on as far as on-farm plots that we're putting out, and we're doing this research with small plot research. Now, very briefly, I wanted to also touch bases here on a survey that we did with farmers. So again, these were wheat farmers all over Kansas, and we were trying to understand how they're managing their crop and how that management is affecting yields across the entire region of Kansas, right? So we went out and we asked farmers, we did a brief survey with them, as you can see here in the screen. In this survey, we were asking what was the previous crop, what was the planting date, what variety they were planting, if they were using seed treatments, what's their tillage practice, all the way until fungicide applications, grain yield, and if they had protein concentration as well. So what you see here is an example of a farmer that we asked for 4 fields. Each column there is a different field that he gave us information from. And so this is field-specific information that was used in commercial fields around Kansas. On this graph here, what you're seeing is the fields that we actually interviewed around the state. Seems like it's a little bit delayed. Yep, there it is. So each one of those yellow dots is a different field that we interviewed around the state. Those green dots, they are the wheat area. You can see that there's a clump there in Barton County. So I appreciate the help of the growers in Barton County helping us doing this survey. It's definitely helpful for us to learn what's working, what's not in commercial fields around Kansas. So what questions can you ask here, right? First is how our growers are managing their wheat, and second, how is that management affecting yield? Just for us to work in the smaller regions that were maybe a little bit more even as far as weather goes, we again divided the state in 3 different regions: North Central Kansas, South Central Kansas, and Western Kansas. And you see there that it was based on rainfall and temperature, right? Western being a drier and cooler environment, North Central a little bit more moist and cool, and South Central more moist and warm. So because Great Bend would have been, based on this grouping, considered North Central Kansas, we are going to focus on what we learned from North Central Kansas here in the next few slides. So overall, how did our yields look like? That's what we're looking at here. In the bottom, you have grain yield, and on the left, you have the number of times that that yield level happened. So for example, if we look at a grain yield of about 60 bushels per acre, we had about 70 fields that were at that yield level, right? Keep in mind, we had about 700 fields throughout the state here. And so we had yields ranging from 5 bushels per acre all the way to about 106 bushels per acre. So first question there, how are our growers managing their crop? And that's what you can see here. NC there stands for North Central Kansas. And you can see the adoption of different practices there, right? So for example, if we look at the amount of foliar fungicide applied, about 55% of the fields were spraying foliar fungicide. That fungicide early on, the jointing one, well, only 10%. Not many growers, only about 10% are really doing that early jointing fungicide. No tillage, about 75% of the growers were doing no till, and so on. So first we have this snapshot of how growers are managing their crop in the state. And second, we can try to learn what's working, what's not. So if we look at individual things here, right, here we're looking at planting date. This is planting date in days after September 1st for North Central Kansas. You can see that the average was the 10th of October, ranging from 20th of September to the 2nd of November. How has planting date affected grain yield in this region? Well, that's what this chart is looking here. So again, remember, these are commercial fields. And what we're looking at is that as we're delaying planting, we have a little bit of an increase in our yield potential, and then it decreases. So the peak yield potential that we have in the region is October 10th, right? So if we could choose one day to plant all the trials. Now, interestingly, if we're not planting October 10th and we're delaying our planting, in North Central Kansas, where a lot of this data came actually from that gray band region, we're losing about 2 bushels per acre per day. So it's a very steep loss in yield potential that we're having as we are delaying our planting date from that October 10th. We can look at it a very similar way here for nitrogen, right? So this is the amount of nitrogen that was applied in the fields. You see that it averaged 92 units of N per acre, ranging from 20 to about 191. And how did nitrogen affect yields? That's what we see here. So overall, if the fields had less than about 100 units of N, they were increasing yields by applying more nitrogen. If nitrogen applied was more than that, we didn't really see much of a response. Very interestingly, these fields that were extremely efficient in using nitrogen, the ones that are very close to that line, they were able to produce almost a bushel per acre for every unit of N that they were putting out. Now, that's considerably less nitrogen per bushel than what we recommend as K-State. We actually recommend about 2.4 units, right? So that tells us, but that 2.4, keep in mind that it takes into account nitrogen, the profile, organic matter nitrogen, previous crop, and many other things. But really what this tells me is that these fields that were very efficiently, they were probably mining some of that nitrogen in the profile, some of the nitrogen from their organic matter as well, and potentially delivering a crop that has a very low protein because they're producing nitrogen, a bushel of wheat with less nitrogen than is actually needed to produce that bushel. Other things that we can do here is compare high yielding fields versus low yielding fields. And I'm just focusing on North Central Kansas. So you see here, the low yielding fields are the light purple bar. High yielding fields are the dark purple ones. And was there a difference in sowing date between those 30 fields that were the highest yields versus the 30 fields that were the lowest yields? And yeah, the lower yielding fields were actually planted about 3 days later than the higher yielding fields on average. Were there differences in seeding rate? Yes. So the low yielding fields that were being planted later were being planted at about 5 pounds of seed per acre more than the high yielding fields. Were there differences in seed fungicide? Yes. So the high yielding fields were more often using fungicide seed treatment and insecticide seed treatment as well. So they were more often using those fields. High yielding fields were on average, adopting more nitrogen as well. You can see here the average nitrogen applied in those high-yielding fields was about 100 units, 30 units more than the low-yielding fields. And also we're applying foliar fungicide more frequently. So 3/4 of the fields that were in the high-yielding group were applying fungicide, whereas just about 30% of those in the low-yielding group were applying fungicide. Right. So I'm really excited about this project. It really helps us learn from what's working, what is not working for commercial fields in Kansas, and really we can take some important take homes here, right? As the effect of sowing date or planting date in our yield potential, nitrogen rates, foliar fungicides, sulfur seed treatment, and things along those lines as well. So this type of project is very exciting for me because we're working with growers directly. We're sitting down with them and trying to understand what's working on their fields, what's not, how they're managing their crop. And we recently just started an alfalfa survey as well. So we have a master student. Her name is Kaylin Fink. She is taking the lead on interviewing alfalfa growers. So if you are an alfalfa grower there in Barton County and you'd like to participate in this survey, please make sure to reach out to Alicia or to myself directly and let me know. And we will be glad to try to learn what's working, what's not working for you for us to improve management recommendations for alfalfa growers in Kansas. So folks, that wraps up my talk here with you today. I hope I was able to give a brief update there on what's going on wheat around the state and what we are doing as far as wheat research, agronomy research to improve our management recommendations as well. And you have my contact information there on the screen. You can reach out to me through email, Twitter, or Facebook. Any of those ways would work. And of course, through the county agent in your county as well. With that, I would like to open for any questions. I don't know, Alicia, if we have any questions on the chat session, or if you guys just want to ask them directly as well. I would be glad to take any questions.
I do not have any that showed up in the chat while you were speaking, but yes, please, if anybody has any questions, please, you can unmute yourself and ask with the size of group we have. Romulo, apparently you are that good that you answered all their questions with your speech.
Oh, I don't know about that, but even if they want to reach out to me directly, you can just shoot me an email or reach me out on Twitter or Facebook there, as you have on the screen, and I'll be glad to continue the conversation there. So, yeah, thank you guys for the comments there.
Yeah, it was an excellent program. And Romulo, since I accidentally had to have you record this, I don't know if this program will go to you or if it will be saved on my computer. But between the both of us, we could probably get the copy of the video out to anybody. If you want to email me at B as in boy, OOR, at ksu.edu. I should be able to send out a copy at another time. I will put that in the chat really quick as well.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's going to be saved on my computer here, and then I can add to the Dropbox, so you're going to have a copy of that as well, Alicia. So
that would be great. One last chance for any questions for Romulo. Well, we thank you very much, Romulo, for being our guinea pig on the presenter for the Great Bend Farm Ranch and Hemp Expo. We're all in this together and we're all trying to be innovative, and you really helped us out by giving us a phenomenal program to start off the week. So thank you very
Excellent.
much for coming, being willing to do this for us.
Yeah, no, thank you, Alicia. Thanks everybody for those who stuck around in the presentation, and I appreciate being on the program. So thank you.
Thank you very much.